Hello, welcome to the Personality Junkie podcast. I'm AJ Drenth.
And I'm Elaine Shalek.
Thanks for joining us today for our fifth podcast. In today's podcast, we are going to be talking about how to know and determine your true personality type. And we get a lot of emails from readers hoping to get some clarity about their personality type. And we thought this would be a great podcast to help people do that. And in this podcast, we're going to take a rather general approach, kind of outline some general strategies that you can use in hopes of getting to your core and true type today. And one thing that I think is important to start off with, Elaine, is in order to really zero in on your type, I think you have to have a strong knowledge not only of yourself, but also of the taxonomy that you're trying to type yourself within. So if AJ, am trying to figure out what type I am in the Enneagram system, I am going to want to understand the Enneagram well. And for the Myers-Briggs, I need to understand the various categories of that taxonomy. So I think sometimes people come into a system blind and they take a test and they hope to just get their type immediately, but there's a lot of understanding that must precede, I think, getting to a true understanding of yourself and your type.
Right. So for that reason, we are going to talk to you guys about the three-prong method to type identification. We feel that these three areas, these three methods are really important to getting a comprehensive understanding of your type. A lot of people maybe do one or the other, or maybe a couple of these, but approaching your type from these three angles, is that's most likely to yield you a more accurate result about understanding your type. And it's important to understand your type because so much of what we write about and talk about on Personality Junkie goes into a great deal of depth and understanding, especially about the functions. And if you don't have a clear understanding of your type, it's going to be very difficult for you to resonate or grow and find wisdom that's applicable to you if you don't have a clear understanding of which of these functions applies to you. So anyway, AJ, I'll let you start by talking about the first of the three methods, and probably the most common and popular. Go ahead.
Okay. I think we should probably start by just listing the three methods, and then we will get into each of them specifically. So the three methods that we think are useful for determining your type are test taking, and the second one is doing type research or reading about the types, and the third is consulting with a type expert. So let's take the first one, test taking, and we should talk about, I think, the pros and cons of each of these three methods, as well as how they might overlap and work together to give you a comprehensive understanding. So test taking is probably one of the preferred methods of nearly everybody. I haven't met too many people who don't enjoy taking little personality tests or quizzes, and these
it's probably the most commonly employed method for either initially becoming aware of your type. A lot of people say, "Oh, I took this type via work or a class, something that way," and then they introduce it to one of their friends. "Oh, you should try taking a type personality type test." So it's a very common and quick and dirty way to start your journey on.
And a lot of people just do it for fun, or they like to compare how they line up against their friends. And so it's just kind of, you have these various quiz websites that where people can develop their own quizzes, and are you an elephant or a donkey or something like that. But today we're obviously going to be focusing in on the Myers-Briggs taxonomy and how you can know your Myers-Briggs type.
So the pros of test taking are pretty self-evident. Test taking is affordable and it's abundant. There are tests virtually all over the internet and so forth, and a variety of different types of tests that you can take, and they're all relatively low cost. if not free. Many of them are. So for people just getting started and wanting to, have it be something that's not terribly expensive, they have a lot of avenues and options for taking a test. Probably the most popular clearly being the MBTI test. Another pro is that it offers at least, a sense of some objectivity. There is a degree of subjective choice in that, the individual taking the test gets to identify their best fit answer, but as a test, it gives that sense of objectivity.
Yeah, I think simply because the fact that it's a test, people imbue it with some, there's a
like an
degree
objective standard
of authority associated with it, and so they feel like if they get this hard result, that there's something special about that.
Yep. And they're quick. They're easy and quick to take. Like most people could complete a basic personality test in under 15 or 20 minutes probably. And so
right. And don't get us wrong. We're not against tests by any means. I mean, we have tests on our website, and especially a couple of clarifier tests that we really believe strongly in. Tests are, in my view, they're a great way to get a ballpark sense, at least, if you're taking a general test. It's a great way to get a ballpark idea of your type and to maybe narrow it down to maybe 2 to 4 types just by taking a couple tests. You can probably, start seeing some patterns after just a few tests, and it's a great way to at least narrow the field down to maybe, 2 to 4 types, I would say.
Right. It's very overwhelming to start out with the 16 types and not know exactly where you're going to fit in there. And then once you take a type test, it starts to whittle away. Most people, especially if the test involves percentages at the end and it tells you like to what degree it appears that you prefer, say, feeling to thinking or, sensing to intuition or so forth, they get a ballpark idea of it's very probable that they're a feeler or that they're a thinker. So that's helpful at narrowing, at least early on, winnowing the field down a bit. And so, again, it's kind of an initial starting point. I think test taking is a great option just as you're starting to get your feet wet.
Exactly.
But cons to test taking are there are several of those. I mean, the first of which is probably something we come across a lot, which is that there are a lot of tests out there that are, not so great, and a test is only as good as, whoever designs this test. And so there's some poorly constructed tests, ones that the wording of the questions is either confusing or ambiguous or misleading, correct, and it's not really getting at, like, the question itself isn't getting at the answer it needs to. And so it can be challenging to know, like, which test should I take, which are the most reliable and accurate. So that's a problem.
Exactly. And I think another problem is not with the test designers, but with the test takers. And that goes back to what I said at the outset here today, is that, one of the core elements to knowing your type is to be able to see yourself objectively and really arrive at true self-knowledge. And if we are being blinded by various factors, then it can be, we're not going to answer the questions accurately.
Right. So there's a lot of subjective, obviously, choosing in the answers of these tests. And so we all have blind spots, these kind of subconscious blind spots that may lead us to answer in a way that does not give us the most accurate reflection of what our true type is. And some of those blind spots include, the tendency to choose culturally preferred responses. So we may be, misled. And this isn't even just broadly in terms of, like American culture or whatever country you happen to live in. But, like, even if it's a culture within your work community, if there's a response that your group of coworkers or friends would likely respond to, you might be influenced to, tailor your answer to reflect the culture that you're around.
Again, this is all subconscious. I mean, we're not going to sit there and say, I want to answer in a disingenuous way and go against who I really am. It's more of just, subconsciously, maybe you want to be an outgoing person, or you want to be an
Right.
open-minded person, or someone who, cares for people, as a caring person. And so all of these things can influence how we may respond, regardless of whether they're an accurate portrait of who we really are.
Right. Right. And so, and in hand with that is the likelihood that we may skew our responses again subconsciously based on the way we wish we were. And then in addition to that being sometimes culturally influenced, it's also influenced in part by our inferior functions, or those weaker parts of ourselves that we wish we could develop further, that we want to believe that we are, have more strength in or are better at, because that would lend a sense of wholeness to us if we were able to strengthen some of these weaker parts. So we project that those inferior function tendencies into our answers, and that can be misleading. Again, this is largely done subconsciously and everybody does it, but that is not going to necessarily give you an accurate representation of what your true type is.
So let's just give a quick example of that. An INTP, for instance, whose dominant function is thinking, may end up skewing, is what you're saying, some of his or her responses, so that they are responding in a way that a feeler would respond to the question. So, and that would be the subconscious's way of saying, I want to be more of a feeling person, or more of a social person.
Yeah, wishful test taking.
Wishful test taking.
Yeah,
there you go.
Exactly. And so, again, without trying to pass judgment on, people who do this, because frankly, we all do it, and I've done it, and I've seen, plenty of examples of other people who've tested this way. We end up answering these questions in ways that aren't actually representative of our strengths, but more of the strengths we wish we had. And so without an awareness that that's something that we are prone to do, it frequently happens that we end up mistyping or coming out with an answer that's not accurate.
I sometimes like to make the distinction between our real self and our ideal self.
Yes.
And so what we're basically saying here is there's a propensity to sometimes score according to one's ideal self,
right,
more than the real self.
And then in addition to that is sometimes people who become really familiar with taking the tests, and let's be real, I bet like 95% of our readers have probably taken more than one test. They've probably taken 3 or 4 and 5 tests. And at some point, again, consciously or subconsciously, we become familiar with what it is that these tests are trying to get at. And so the ability to predict the answers end up actually skewing the answers. We know what the test is trying to get at, and sort of like
this is a JP question. This is a TF question.
Right. And so then to like validate what we to validate either our ideal self or what we wish we would test as, we answer in response. We outsmart the test, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I'm an INFJ, so I'm gonna ensure that by the way I respond is consistent with
how an INFJ would respond.
Right.
And then the last thing that I would mention is that and people have commented on this as well, that the test results, you can take the same test on a different day and ultimately end up with a different result, from one day to another, depending on how the course of your day is going, or the mood that you're in that day, or what kind of work you've had to perform that day. If I'm an N type, but I've been busy, running errands, achieving, doing action, cleaning house, like doing like S-type tasks all day, I might be more apt to answer that I'm an S-type, because my most current, state of doing is probably what's most, at the forefront of my mind. And so then I respond in kind with, my most recent behavior, what seems most, of that moment to me.
And that's why I emphasize in My True Type, my book, that you really need to, I think, bring a historical understanding to your understanding of yourself, so that you're answering according to general patterns and general behaviors and attitudes, rather than how you're feeling that day. Now, it's easier said than done, but I think that's generally good advice to try to really put yourself in the place of who you've been historically and repeatedly over time.
What AJ's driving at here, again, pertains to what we've said all along with respect to test taking, which is that there is it's important to kind of step outside of yourself somewhat in a to get outside those subjective biases. What did I just achieve today? Or what am I feeling today? Or what is culturally happening with me at this, at this time? Like step out of what would normally, kind of skew us and try to have more of a
take a bird's eye
view or an objective approach to really looking at who we are over the course of time and so forth. And so, and that's going to be true all along the process of typing oneself, is to try to maintain as objective of a, lens on yourself as possible. But goodness knows that is a very difficult task, because subconscious factors are subconscious for a reason, because we don't know that they're there, or don't readily know that they're there and influencing us. So, so with that, maybe we'll segue into the second method of determining type, and that would be the type research approach.
Right. I think both, not only do people enjoy test taking, but I haven't met anyone who gets who's given a type after taking a test and who doesn't want to go read about that type and to say, oh, I want to see how this type is described now. And so that's kind of what we're referring to here, is the process of, it's almost more of a qualitative approach or a holistic approach. Let me read about this type and see everything that entails, and see if this squares with the type that I was given once I took the test.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll go through and we'll read all the various type descriptions, at least of the ones that relate to the type we were given. So
right, and I mean, so comparatively with the test taking, the benefit of looking at type research as a, whole concept is that it doesn't risk losing the forest for the trees. If some of these, most of the type tests involve trying to zero in on a preference or a function, and so, kind of compartmentalizing each of these trees, but not necessarily recognizing how they all kind of work together in the entirety of the type. And
exactly.
once you start delving into the type research, you can see that there are certain broader patterns that emerge specific to, INTPs versus INTJs, or that sort of thing. And that you would miss just by trying to zero in on, am I a T or an F, or am I a, N or an S type.
A type is greater than the sum of its parts, right?
Yeah.
So in writing a type description, you're not, some websites may do this, but ideally you're not just describing introversion, describing intuition, describing thinking, and then kind of just adding those together. But you have to have a general or holistic understanding of what an INTJ is, and that's what should kind of drive a good deal of the type description, not just adding up the various preferences. And that's what people, I think, are really going for in reading the description, is getting that qualitative, holistic sense. Mm-hmm. Does this square with my intuition, my intuitive sense of who I am?
Right.
And especially for intuitive types, that's going to be the method. Now, the sensing type may go through and want to say, okay, do the specifics really fit me?
Right. They want specific examples, and then to say, yeah, oh yes, I do this. I specifically do this.
Right. So how we use type research is even influenced by our type. Right. So N's and S's will, maybe use it in different ways and for different reasons, but the fact of the matter is that, it's also an integral part of knowing your type as well. And another advantage of using the reading type descriptions and so forth is they are abundant, they are affordable, similar to the all the online tests.
A lot of information
out there.
Available.
But I also feel like that same factor could be a con as well, because if you get different descriptions from different websites, you're trying to reconcile those and say and realizing that this one describes the INTJ or INTP, whatever, different than this website
right.
does. And so how do I know which is the true description of the INTP or INTJ?
Right. So then there's, you have this issue of disparities among the descriptions causing confusion. People see one INTJ description and it reads somewhat differently than somebody else's INTJ description, and maybe they resonate with one but not the other, and then they can't figure out, does that still mean they're an INTJ, or does that mean is it just that the description is a bad description? So what's going on there? And so sometimes I've seen it happen over and over again that people it's like they get inundated with too much information.
Right.
So they start out with very little, and then they go take the test, and then the more they start researching, the more the act of like projection and then introjection occurs, and pretty soon we can read through probably all of these type descriptions to some extent and find cherry pick things that resonate with us, and that just leads to more confusion.
Right, and I think forums can be the same way. You get different people chiming in, offering their opinion on this type or that type, and it just creates a whole
lot of noise,
a lot of noise, a lot of artifact to try to sift through in determining your type.
And then what can happen is I think people get so they go down the rabbit hole, if you will, and get so submerged in this like research process of reading about all the various types, and then like ultimately they don't have much. There's not a lot of objective standard left there. It's just them using, their own lens to go about seeking out whatever they think resonates with them. So it's, of all of these methods that we're describing today, these three methods, this is arguably the most subjective of the methods. It's very informal, it's very subjective, and whatever the individual doing the researching, feels like is resonating with them, they get to decide what that means in terms of who they are or their type.
I think sometimes people just kind of latch on to one or two authors or descriptions and say, these are my favorites and this is the one that describes me the best, and so I'm going to stick with that one.
But then all along the way, that same issue that we talked about with respect to the test taking comes in of, the ideal self versus the real self. And it gets so easy to get lost in seeking out whatever resonates with your ideal self rather than your real self, so that, again, we're not really maintaining that measure of objectivity that we're seeking for, striving for when we're trying to determine our true type. And so if you go down that rabbit hole and start getting lost in all of this type research, I think it's entirely possible that you run the risk of engaging in confirmation bias, looking for information that just reaffirms what you already believe about yourself or believe to be your true what you believe to be your true type, whether it's your true type or not, or whether it's your ideal self's type, looking to confirm itself, or your real type.
And I don't think having an ideal self is bad. I think
in fact, the ideal self can tell us a lot about our real self, because if I know, as an for example, me, Elaine, as an INFJ, that my ideal self wishes that she was, more willing to like try things and be experimental in an SE way, or be very productive in an S way, and like, kind of follow through in action on the things that I idealize or think about.
Might give you some insight into your inferior functions, is what you're saying, right?
Well, that, and then it tells me maybe the reason I'm latching onto these things is because I have inferior SE, and so that then reconfirms that I am an INFJ and not an SE type. You know what I'm saying? So, insofar as, that's still valuable information, like catching yourself engaging in this ideal self game where if you can realize that you're projecting these ideals into your answers and kind of catch yourself, you can use that information to help you understand what your true type is, rather than to mislead you about your true type.
And I feel like having an ideal self is essential for growth. It kind of pulls us forward in our development. So we're not suggesting that you shouldn't have some ideals or some goals for yourself. I think what we're saying is just important to differentiate between the two to some extent, and that way you can identify your real self, your real type, and realize that there are ideals that are built into that type, i.e. the inferior function, the lower functions that you're going to develop toward as you as you grow and develop within your personality type.
But if you're falsely posturing about what your strength is or what you're good at, you don't give yourself the opportunity to learn how you're supposed to grow.
Right.
And so that's the problem. That's yes, having an ideal self is natural, normal, and even essential to to the human experience and in the personality, in the journey of authenticity. We all are looking for that way in which we ultimately grow and become whole. But if we mislead ourselves into thinking we're one way that we're not, and then that maybe we've already achieved these things that we idealize, then what opportunity is there to be honest in the assessment process and then truly grow if we already think we're exceptional at the things, at these inferior function, elements? Like what opportunity do we really give ourselves to catch any blind spots or to grow?
Well, there are people out there who say you are what you believe you are. And so it gets into a debate about, the power of belief, how
and
much,
about subjectivity and objectivity,
right.
which is really at the heart of this question of trying to type yourself, because again, time and again, we have this issue of people who, kind of stand behind the idea that like only I know my true type. Only I can determine what my personality is type. That can't be told to me. That can't be, determined by somebody else. Like it's a very personal, subjective thing. And that,
right. And I think that's almost a segue into our next section.
Right. So yeah. So the third method then would be consulting a type expert to help get at your true type. I personally am a strong advocate of this third method. I think it's the one that's most often
That's because you're
ignored.
a J type.
It's because I'm a J, and it's because I have FE. It's true. But I have enough experience to know that it is, like we've talked about here, that it's very common for people to be blind to their own biases, and whether we want to believe that that's who we are or not doesn't change the fact that more often than not we don't see ourselves the way we are. We see ourselves the way we wish ourselves to be, which is a great thing, because that gives us the potential to grow and to have value and to make ourselves better. So that in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but then when it prevents us from really honestly understanding ourselves and catching what we're missing, catching the blind spots, there isn't an opportunity for growth if we don't honestly assess what we're missing. So consulting an expert, that has the value of bringing this, sense of objectivity and a huge breadth of knowledge, if assuming we have an expert who is actually an expert and is very familiar with the taxonomy, and then has also had enough experience trying to help others type themselves as well. They may have seen more. They may have seen various examples and similarities and contrasts and so on between the types that someone who's kind of just getting started may be missing and not know what to look for.
I like to think of it, I like to liken it to the act of diagnosing medical problems or medical issues. If a doctor has seen, diagnosis X 20 times, in the last, year or so, he or she's gonna do probably a pretty good job of identifying that problem.
Right.
And the same is true for the types. If someone who is well versed in the taxonomy that you're using and has spent a lot of time observing people and typing people over many years, is going to be able to spot various types rather quickly. And I almost feel like a good deal of typing can occur in a relatively short period of time. Even on a first time meeting someone, I think experts can really zero down the type pretty close to what the person's type is in not too long of a time period.
Yeah, and I mean, this again is where the forest for the trees may come in. If someone who has a lot of familiarity with this area can see the sum total of the parts kind of working in the individual that they're counseling, they can pick up, traits in conjunction with other or functions working in tandem with other functions, that kind of thing that can help, rather than, sort of individually blocking off, well, here's T or TI in action, and here's, F or FE in action, whatever the individual element they might be able to see in the...
You're saying there's a holistic impression conferred by encountering someone. Yeah, after you've encountered a certain type so many times, it becomes almost ingrained in you, so that it, like riding a bike, it's almost just comes naturally to know what that type is when you encounter it.
You also pick up, counselor may pick up like certain non-verbal cues, like body language and that sort of thing, that can be helpful, like that a test wouldn't necessarily get at, or type research
or
might
even
not necessarily get
listening
at.
to the tone of someone's voice, noticing body language, noticing eye movements, lots of different cues that I think are factored into the holistic impression. You could separate them out perhaps too, and say, these types tend to look this way,
and that assumes that this person is, knowledgeable and, has a psychology background, and then is actually an objective party, because letting your friends or someone else tell you, or your significant other tell you what you're like, may not always be accurate, because once we start to kind of build these more intimate relationships with people, and we start to kind of get we become involved subjectively in our understanding of that person, and so then we kind of imbue that person with, what we think we see, or what we wish we saw in our partner, and so then or friends or whatever, and so then we end up,
so
risking skewing again.
Our partner is complicit in the the subjectivity.
Right. That's exactly right. So some of the pros to consulting an expert are that it can bring that extra knowledge base and objectivity, as well as cast light on any of our blind spots, like the inferior function issues that we might not realize that we're engaging in. But with the pros come the cons, and so
one con, I think, as an INTP, we can be skeptical of any expert, just because they have credentials doesn't make them an expert,
right.
And so there can be a distrust in experts. I think INFPs can have a distrust in other types too. But I think IPs in particular are apt to make the case that no one knows me better than myself,
right.
And because we spend so much time in self-reflection and, kind of analyzing ourselves, that there's no way that anyone else could do that more effectively than I can do it.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there can be a resistance there, potentially even a fear of like, well, what if I've been doing this for all this time and I was wrong about myself, and so people don't really want to hear that either. So, I guess if you're going to use an expert, it would have to be someone that you trust and you feel like they could offer an objective and well-informed view of who you are.
That's right. Yep. So who decides who's is qualified to consider themselves an expert, and how do you trust that that's the case? Another con is that they're experts are forced to use the immediate external data that they get, and that information to draw, conclusions, which unless you've spent a great deal of time with a therapist or counselor who's gotten, and that the more information probably the better here, but who's gotten more of a history or background on you, if you're kind of doing a one-time consult, contextually speaking, like how much information are they actually getting beyond, again, who you express yourself as in that day. And maybe in one day, again, this could be determined by, like, what did you do today? What was your work like today? Or are you feeling emotionally overwhelmed because, you've had, some sad news that you got today. So now, you're being more emotional than you typically would, or something of that nature that is affecting how you present yourself.
That day.
On that given day.
That's true. But I do feel like there are certain things that can't be concealed about your type, even if you are having a bad day. So some of some of it is just flat out objective and can't be overridden by the contingencies of a given day.
Right.
And so, I do believe in expertise in this area, but I can also understand why certain types are going to be a little bit skeptical of it as well. And again, it's finding someone that you trust to give you an objective viewpoint.
Right. I mean, so consulting an expert is something that's probably going to, like you've already said, appeal less maybe to IP types, especially ITPs, and probably appeal more to extroverts. Or judgers. That are more likely to put trust in, in others, or, what maybe seems like a more objective method for for determining your type.
Exactly.
But another downside of consulting an expert, though, is that this is generally more expensive and it can be time consuming. And so that's not usually the first go-to approach that people take. They start with the test and then maybe might get into the type research, and that's why we've put them in the order that we have. And then, maybe once they feel like they're getting familiar or still stuck or hung up and can't really figure it out, they might then decide, okay, maybe it's time to consult someone who has more experience or knows a little bit more about this.
Right. What do you think is a reasonable time, Elaine, for someone to be able to go about determining their true type?
For the individual, or for the counselor or the type expert?
Well, for the individual who is maybe weighing all three of these things.
I mean, I think it can take. I think it can take up to a few months even to fully.
Well,
I
know it probably took me over a year, I think, to finally determine that I was an INTP.
I mean, I took just if we're sharing personal stories, I took the test when I was quite young. You
took the actual MBTI.
Yes.
Weren't you 8 years old or 9 years old?
I was 8 years old, and my parents had both taken it, and then I was administered the test, and I did test as an INFJ at 9 years
Amazing.
old. But then I actually didn't remember having done that, and then later in my teenage years, early high school or somewhere around that area, I took it again. And without remembering that I had previously tested as an INFJ, I again tested as an INFJ in the test-taking process. And then over time, the more reading and experience and so forth that I had with it, the more that kind of validated that I was, an INFJ type. And so it generally, I haven't spent a lot. There was a period of my life very late, where I was kind of going through some difficult times that, I kind of began to question my J nature. I was having difficulty making decisions and career-wise and so forth, and began to wonder if I was really a P.
So again, that speaks to the role of circumstances too.
That's right. But I also wasn't. I also recognize now, in kind of the hindsight and clarity of that, I can understand the circumstances having affected, that possibility that I thought I was a P. But now in retrospect, again, it's just it's very difficult for me to see that it's possible that after I've been to multiple counselors and taken several tests again.
I spent a long time debating between INTP and INTJ.
Right. And that's very common. And once you start to see that there are certain patterns that can emerge with respect to it's there are a couple of types that easily mistype, INTJs as INTPs, and I think we've talked about this before. INFPs testing as INFJs and vice versa.
I feel like the JP variable is the most commonly confused one.
I think that's definitely true.
And actually, I think there's a trend. I think Ps are more apt to mistype as Js than the other way around. But I wouldn't bet my life on it, but it seems from what I've observed to be a little bit more common going in that direction.
Yeah.
And part of that could be cultural, because I think society values J characteristics. Following through on things, being on time, so at least in
productivity.
There are some cultural, forces telling us that we should all be J types.
Right. So the more we can kind of keep some of these types of concepts in mind with respect to the influence of culture and or the expectations of our friends, family, jobs and so on, we can begin to recognize, is that really me, or is that something that I'm doing because my job demands it, or because, my spouse asks that I be this way, or what,
Right.
and sort of teasing those things out, because only through that truer understanding of type do we get closer to growing and authenticity and finding the best way to develop within our type, to strengthen the weaknesses that are naturally present, in that journey.
Exactly. And what I would say is, if you want to dive into some of the common mistypings that occur, that is something I include at the end of each section in my book, My True Type. It talks about, how, in what ways or for what reasons introverts may type as extroverts, and so on and so forth, for all of the different preferences. So I do get into that more. If there's a certain preference that you're wrestling with, am I an S or an N, etc., then the book does include quite a bit on those different, troubles that people can get into there.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna kind of wrap it up here, but again, this, without getting too much into the specifics, just to recap that, if you've only kind of explored one avenue of type identification, only taken the test, or only read the type descriptions, which I can't imagine. I mean, I guess that's possible without having taken the test, but or maybe you haven't tried consulting a type expert yet, or a counselor, someone who's familiar with the taxonomy. I think that all three of those are valuable. Getting the outside input that could help you understand what you might be missing about yourself in an objective way, but then weighing that vis-a-vis what you know about yourself to ultimately arrive at, the best fit type for you.
Right. I think all of these three methods can be synthesized. All the information can be brought together, and I think that's when you're going to feel most confident, when you have all three of these elements in place and can say, okay, this is, all of these things are pointing to this as the most probable type.
Right. And then once you have that, that's where the journey can begin with respect to figuring out, how you approach the world and how best for you to approach the world, and then how to begin to really grow and develop and find a meaningful, purposeful life for you.
Enjoyed this podcast and would like to support it, you can do so in several ways. In addition to purchasing our books and personality tests, you can contribute through the support page on Personality Junkie. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution, you can do so through our Patreon page, which we link to in the footer of our website. Patreon supporters can enjoy a variety of benefits, such as access to unpublished material, complimentary copies of our upcoming books, as well as input on post and podcast topics. Your contributions make it possible for us to continue to provide quality posts and podcasts. Thank you for your support.